Welcome to Conversation with a Geographer. I'm Mike DeVivo, Professor of Geography at Grand Rapids Community College. And today, we're very fortunate to have Jen Guo, who has been a professor at San Francisco State University for many years. Jen, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for inviting me, Mike.
It's really a pleasure. I'm going to ask you, as I have asked a number of people I have interviewed, about what inspired them to pursue geography and other things. But before we go into that, I'd like to mention that you bring a really valuable perspective to the world of American academic geography because you were raised in China and you came to the U.S. as a graduate student. And so I think you can offer some significant insight to professors who have students from elsewhere who are not really accustomed to students that are from areas that are that are in Asia or even in Latin America. So if you don't mind, would you comment a little bit on your upbringing and what inspired you to pursue geography in Beijing?
Oh, yes, that's a good favorite topic. I grew up in Beijing, China, during a time of turmoil and chaos and confusion, and people like us, didn't really have the opportunities to travel, and people didn't have cars. There were no decent road systems, and even riding the train for a few hours, journeying out to a couple of 100 miles was, a great adventure and a rare opportunity. So, but then, as you well know, Mike, like the ancient Greeks. The Greeks, had to say that was what drove their people to be interested in geography was their curiosity about other places, other cultures, how other people in other places live. And I certainly was very curious about that, and then didn't have the opportunity to explore, to travel. And but then one day, as a teenager, I came upon the trilogy by the great Jules Verne, and we all we all know of him as the great French sci-fi author. But then he actually was a great geographer. In this trilogy, Captain Grant's Children, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, and The Mysterious Island. In this trilogy, of course, I read the Chinese translation, not French original or even English translation. So I was so inspired, especially the first one, the Captain Grant's Children. This Scottish aristocrat set off to rescue the Scottish explorers. So they basically encircled the 47th South Parallel and trying to look for them. And then a French geographer got on their ship by mistake, and this was a nerd. And then he was the geographer who had not really traveled widely, but then who seemed through his studies to know about the people, culture, natural environment in every place, from Patagonia to Southern Australia. So that really inspired me, that I want to be that person. So I think that was the beginning of my curiosity and motivation. And then I was one of I think I was the only one of my class of 50 in China, when I went to college, who actually applied for the geography major. All the others applied for mathematics, physics, and those kind of things, but then they were assigned to geography because geography department didn't get anybody. So that was the beginning of the journey that brought me to where I am, and that brought me to you.
Hey, and so you studied geography at Beijing Normal University, correct?
Yes, correct.
And can you comment about the curriculum and courses that you took, the manner in which professors directed their classes, in contrast to how they might be directed in the U.S.?
Yeah. I think the gap between the China and the United States in terms of higher education, the course delivery, things like that, is much narrower today. A lot of the professors in the leading universities in China are West/US trained, nowadays. But on the other hand, in my time, 40 years ago, most of the professors, were either trained in China, or some of them who are lucky or politically more aligned with the government were trained in the Soviet Union. So it was a very traditional, stern kind of, and a matter of fact kind of environment. And professors came to lectures or seminars expecting that you had prepared, for the class, expecting commanding respect, and didn't really have anything wishy-washy, pandering or, in a positive way, being more considerate to the students. So it was more of a straightforward lecture or discussion kind of things. And we were actually not very much encouraged to discuss, things, to voice our differences and things like that. So it was a lot more regimental. And then another interesting thing was that 40 years ago in China, all the geography programs emphasized on physical geography, what we would say physical geography, because human geography was too sensitive an area, a field to get into. I remember there was a professor who was trained in Britain and in human geography. Came back, and actually, to be exact, I remember people said that he specialized in political geography. Maybe he studied under Mackinder, who knows, came back to China and spent the last of his 30-some years. I saw him at a distance, and he was an old guy when I went to college, and died a couple of years later. And he never got to do any research or barely taught any classes, because he couldn't teach any of the physical geography classes, and there was no, not only and he was not allowed to teach human geography classes, so there was no human geography, curriculum in my time. Mm-hmm. Things have changed, of course.
Well, you certainly were captivated by European civilization in many ways through. You've related to me before your interest in classical music and literature, and of course the work of geographers. And this brought you to the United States as a graduate student to pursue the human side of geography, I guess. Comment upon your impressions when you arrived in the United States and for the first time in the U.S., and you are a graduate student. Must have been shocking in many ways. Can you provide us with some insight?
Certainly it was a cultural shock. But then I had anticipated that. I had studied a little bit. I actually tried to write my master's degree thesis on the U.S. Corn Belt when I was in China. The research was limited. That there was not a lot of information. Of course, I didn't have the insider's kind of perspective either. But then I became very, very curious of the United States and wanted to learn more. That was why I wanted to come here. Also, PhD programs were not available in China at the time, so I wanted to pursue a doctorate. In one of the best, if not the best, from my perspective back then, places on Earth. And of course, I had heard of the people who had been here, and not rumors. I had heard about how the higher education in the United States, the higher education environment was like. But then still, it was a cultural shock. One big thing was that people, it was a lot more interactive, in the classroom than the outside the classroom, among the graduate students, between the graduate student and the faculty members, and of course, within the community, very interactive, and people wanted to and dared to voice their opinions, and they wanted to have debates. So it was a much more lively kind of environment, challenging environment that it took me quite a while to get used to. I don't know if I had fully gotten used to that. Basically speaking up
And that was at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville. Were you inspired by any particular professors while you were studying in Knoxville that were either at the university or geographers in the U.S. that provided you with mentoring or insight?
Yeah, I mean, I think on the academic scholarly side, I was more inspired by somebody who was not at Tennessee. I was most inspired. I was interested in regional agricultural cultural geographies, and I had good fortune of audacity to write to a great geographer, John Fraser Hart at Minnesota. And when I was trying to work on my thesis, and I came upon several articles by him on the Midwest, agriculture, rural development, agriculture in the Midwest, and especially the Corn Belt. I remember his great article in the Annals of the AAG called The Change in the U.S. Corn Belt. Mm-hmm. I mean, that was my quote-unquote Bible for the thesis. So I kept in, after I came to the United States, I contacted him again and started a communication that continued for well over a decade. And he was the great inspiration to me, and we met a number of times at the AAG annual meetings, and he even invited me out to lunch. So, and people were like very surprised to see that this hapless foreign student, how come he got to meet to be together with this John Fraser Hart, this great geographer, and he was the great inspiration, and his insights, his support throughout the first half of my academic studies and the career were immeasurable, let's say.
Hart did play a significant role, I think, with individual geographers from outside of Minnesota, for sure. I know that another Tennessee alum, John Morgan at Emory and Henry College in Virginia, commented to me that John Fraser Hart did much to elevate his program and provide insight to him in some of his research later on, and spoke highly of Morgan's research too. So you're in good company, really. And Hart,
I'm glad to hear that.
yeah, Hart just retired a few years ago.
That's
in his 90s. Isn't that amazing? Yeah. Did some great work, Yeah. And so, will you comment on the research you conducted on healthcare, the geography of healthcare, when you're at Tennessee? Can you comment on what some of your findings happen to be?
Well, my dissertation research evolved, through a very rugged terrain, as you know. The tool focusing on the American healthcare systems, the geography, the spatial pattern of American healthcare systems. And looking back, that was quite a while ago. Some of the findings I made are still valid, and that's why when I converse with people in the healthcare field, for example, my wife, who is a nurse, and about some of the issues, challenges, and the problems with our healthcare systems, especially from the spatial perspective, spatial networking kind of perspective, are still valid. Mostly, I think the chief finding was that our healthcare system overall was very resilient and very functional, and with this feeder network, with the different levels of hospitals and care, and then which I think that really came through during the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic. And while China was in lockdown, I talked to my sister, in 2020, and the Chinese I knew, and the Chinese overall felt sorry for us because China, through the lockdowns, the Chinese population obviously was quote unquote safe from getting infected with the COVID. They felt that we had high rates of infection, a lot of deaths, and we also had our lockdowns. But I told her, and I told others who were willing to listen, that the U.S.'s healthcare system, in addition to the scientific research, the great pharmaceutical capabilities, that we were going to develop vaccines and the therapeutics and they were already appearing, on the horizon by that time. And also, I told them that in the U.S., that not only the healthcare resources, despite all our problems, are problematic, but then on the other hand, we have rich resources. And then one of the things is this a feeder network, and this a kind of network. So people don't swarm the hospital, unlike in China. When they get sick, they rush to the hospital, and they want to go to the trauma centers because they think that they provide the best care. But we have a much better, more like a system. And then the Chinese started to recognize that not only in healthcare, but overall, U.S. has by far the most superior system of allocating resources. And that would prevent this swarming, this kind of, even though we got close from time to time, so that from getting overwhelmed. So those were some of the findings I made, during my dissertation research, and then they turned out to be very educational, informative to me, and then I think they're true.
Well, that's very, very thought-provoking in many ways, and I'm certain that there'll be some individuals that may wish to debate with you in China and in the U.S. But you have the evidence to back up your comments. So you were at Northern Michigan University for a short time, and then you were offered a position at San Francisco State University. And when you came to San Francisco from the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, tell me, how did you feel? What were your views from the Upper Peninsula on the shore of Lake Superior to what might be is certainly one of the most beautiful cities in the world in terms of its natural setting, if not the most?
I came to the interview in mid-March, okay? And then it was a balmy day in the UP of Michigan because the sun was out, the high was in the 20s, so it was...
I was in the 20s.
Came to San Francisco, people were shivering because the high was only in the 50s. And people were in like heavy jacket, like a down jacket, telling me that you came at a bad time. We're having like a cold spell, So when the kind professors, the colleagues, future colleagues, drove me around, showed me the city, and we drove. I remember we drove through Golden Gate Park, and with all the green, lush greens, and everything, I thought this is heaven. Heaven. So, that's why, I have no complaints with no issue with the Northern Michigan University. I had wonderful friends and great students. It's a beautiful place when it's not snowed in, even when it was snowed in, it's beautiful. It's dauntingly beautiful in its own way, and I still miss it. I still have some friends there. But then the San Francisco, was just, to me, heaven on earth in terms of the natural environment. And as you commented, through time, that is one of the most beautiful cities in the world. It's absolutely true. And of course, the social, cultural environments are very different too. The students are different, and the challenges and the rewards are different. But both places are great. But then, in terms of the natural environment, hardly anywhere else would come up close to San Francisco, as you know.
Well, you commented just a moment ago about your students. Would you care to talk about some of the research that you have directed with regard to some of your graduate students and some of your stellar undergraduates?
Yes. We have at San Francisco State Geography Department, we have a master's degree program. And some of the undergraduate students, they also have conducted research, and I had good fortune. I've had the good fortune of working with some of them. And the interesting thing is that, there's a saying, as you know, that all politics are local. And I think the geographies are also local. Because overwhelmingly, our graduate students and the undergraduate students are interested in local issues, environmentally related issues, and I've worked mostly with the people who are in, let's say, public policy planning, and quite a few of former students that I had a good fortune of working with are now planners. Okay, planners at different levels, and so they wanted to be more engaged in their own living environment, their own hometowns or their own home regions. So that's something really interesting. And then the research that they've done are mostly like I've been involved with are mostly have to do with the urban change dynamics, politics, and the things like urban renewal and things like that, gentrification, especially, for example, a couple of students wrote about how different power plays, stakeholders and work out the coalitions to make tremendous changes in San Francisco. For example, one of the well-known, you are very familiar with the area, like the Treasure Island redevelopment and South Market development, those kind of things. So very rewarding. But then it's very local, it's environmentally and urban related.
Well, it's interesting. I think, and you correct me if you believe I am wrong, but I think the college and university students in California have a very deep topophilia for their places of residence, the places they've grown up. More so, I think, than college and university students elsewhere in the U.S. Maybe part of it is because of the sunshine or the cultural landscape, but my impression is there is a much greater topophilia held among college and university students in California than in many other places.
I cannot agree with you more. I mean, that was my first impression, and I used to joke about it, calling them being provincial. But that's exactly how you described it. Recently, I read several things by Yi-Fu Tuan and before his passing, actually, and I was and I read about his biography. I could connect, his thoughts, his great works to my experience as a Chinese who came over here, in a very remote, inferior way, similar to his. And but also, the students and some of our faculty members, colleagues, but especially students, and their sense of topophilia, the reasons are such. That as you just briefly outlined, I cannot agree with you more. And that's very intriguing, very interesting. Of course, I'm speaking mostly about the people in the Bay Area, from the Bay Area, but I think there are some similarities between the Bay Area and Southern California, San Diego, Los Angeles areas, like in terms of this sense of a topophilia. And I cannot speak as much about the folks in the Inland Empire, so I don't know. But I cannot agree with you more, definitely.
Well, I think, I mean, that's very interesting. And of course, in San Francisco, you have a large number of Asian students, and some of your students are coming from San Francisco's Chinatown. And they are oftentimes very, very much restricted in their outlooks on life vis-a-vis their residences, having very, very little experience outside of just these couple of parts of San Francisco. Would you comment on that?
Yeah, that's a really a pointed kind of question point that you just made. Just like going on the anecdotal story. When I was teaching intro geography, the GE class, a lot of people just take it to fulfill their requirements. I had the 4 young women. They were all from Oakland's Chinatown, and 2 of them, if I remember correctly, this was years back, were we made a field trip once to Oakland's Chinatown. You made great observations about that. That is that there are certain Vietnamese, they are of a Chinese ethnic descent, descent that would congregate in and around the Chinatowns, unlike the Vietnamese who live separately. And then those two of them were like that. And then they had a very strong accent. They're very timid. They came to me seeking for help. The part of the reason they took my class because of who I was, my ethnic background, actually. So they came and confided in me how intimidated they were. And then basically they traveled between Oakland's Chinatown and San Francisco State on BART to attend class and would go back. I said, what would you do in your spare time outside the work and the class and your education? It's like watch, Chinese language TV programs or movies and things like that. So very limited. I've had other experiences, including a couple of graduate students that I work with. So, and then they face like familial pressure. Their families pressure them to pursue more, let's say, lucrative or practical, careers or professions like accounting, or if they were quote unquote good at, maybe becoming MDs and, those are instead of geography. What is geography? What can you do? How much money you make? So the ones who eventually chose geography as their majors and as their future careers, you really were enlightened and had to fight through the cultural bindings and, so that was very admirable. I think this is true. I've worked in recent years with a lot of Latino students. A lot of them were from Southern California. I could, my observation was that the Chinatown students and the Latino students from Latino communities, they were facing the same challenges. So it's very interesting, and that there's for us as educators, as teachers, to pay attention to that and to encourage them, support them, to help them lead, accompany them to, the direction of career and education that they're inspired to.
It's important, I believe, that we really attempt to develop some innovative strategies for students to employ with their families, especially those from, as you say, Latino and Asian communities, where the emphasis on higher education is to achieve a vocation that will be financially lucrative rather than a liberal arts and sciences degree that might be more rewarding and also lucrative. But it's difficult to place a monetary value on a liberal arts and sciences degree in contrast to one in accounting or one in engineering or something of that nature, know?
Yeah. But then, the saving grace is that, when I came to the United States, the U.S. geography was undergoing a renaissance, and that was that the physical geography was coming back, and also the techniques field was emerging, like GIS, remote sensing. Nowadays, I think those two areas are really the most, let's say, inspiring and then rewarding. No matter it's a career, intellect, or like you said, the financial rewards. The GIS definitely is great, and then also the renaissance of the physical geography, and then the capability of geographers to deal with environmental issues. That definitely would bring them to like environmentally related careers, and so they can see that they can do just fine. Maybe not as much money as accountants or MDs, but it's not too badly.
No, it isn't, and I think that with reference to their desire to really contribute to their local communities, which is what their Topophilia is all about in many ways, these courses and these skills provide them with opportunities to ameliorate social and environmental injustice that occurs in these areas.
I cannot agree with you more. That's great, and great. The conclusion, I would say.
And speaking of conclusions, we have just a few moments to go, but I'd like you to reflect for a few moments on some suggestions you might have for students that are considering a path in geography, or geography students that are considering advanced degrees, and even colleagues about where to go in the discipline and how to overcome challenges. If you could just provide a few words, that would be great.
Yeah. I would say that, this is America. This is still America that I dreamed of, that I came here for. This is still America. And so you can brave the elements and go out, take on the adventures, follow your curiosity, and be driven by your true motivations. And then I think the geography is such a field today that is being recognized as being not only extremely relevant, but also extremely important to anything that's environmentally related. So there's a bright future there. The future is only going to get better. So don't be too hesitant or be told otherwise that a geography career is not going to sustain your life or your family life at all. And with that as the basis, and you pursue your interest and your academic interest and develop a career accordingly, it's going to be rewarding on that level too.
Well, Jen, I think those are very, very provocative words, and that's great advice for prospective students for sure. We'll have to close for a moment, or in a moment, and I'd just like to once again express my appreciation for you coming here to join us today. Geography lives.
Well, I want to say one last thing. That is that with people like you serving in the geography field, we're all blessed.
Thank you so much, Jen. And I very much appreciate those very kind words. And same to you, really.
Thank you very much, Mike.
Okay. Well, this concludes this episode of Conversation with a Geographer. Thank you.